Today, I am going to be talking about mindfulness. I'm going to start out by saying that I'm going to, right off the bat, go a little bit off of what I had written by saying that there are prerequisites for us to practice, whether we're practicing on the cushion or off the cushion, but especially when we're practicing on the cushion, that we need a favorable quiet space that's free of distractions. That this comes from a teaching Krangu Rinpoche gave, but it's a pretty standard approach that's healthy and that is at a moderate temperature, especially for us Westerners that are used to heating, modern heating. And we also need to have our mind free of a lot of desires, even thinking I need to meditate, or I need to do this, I need that to meditate. I was thinking when I was reading this, I was talking to my son a few days ago, and we used to do cross-country skiing when he was young. And I haven't done cross-country skiing for a very long time, but he's gotten into it again. And he is 55 years old now, to give you an idea how far back this is. And he was saying nowadays, unlike when he was young, everybody's got to have this really fancy outfit on with all these very expensive clothing and so forth, and so on down the line. And the skis are different, and everything is much more expensive than it was back then. And guess what? We did cross-country skiing just fine back then without spending all that money. So getting back to what this has to do with meditating is that just let go of thinking, in order for me to do this properly, I need to have all of this, Dharma stuff. It's nice to have it, but think of Milarepa. He had nothing. So go into the shrine room or wherever it is that you practice with the idea that I have enough. Now let's meditate. And it's good to have a certain amount of contentment about that. Also, give up any worldly activities that you're having, the thoughts about worldly activities while you're meditating. This isn't the time to be having these kinds of thoughts. You want to be concentrating on your practice, not what's happened before you started to practice or what's going to happen after you practice. That the best that you can, focus on what's happening right now. Now, with that said, there's a lot that we can do in our daily lives that will help reduce our active mind. That, quite honestly, that there is so much distraction available in life right now. Just so many things. You can get on the internet, you can get Netflix, you can do Twitter, Facebook, any number of things that I'm not even aware of because I have my age and my lack of interest in exploring them. But it's interesting when we think about it. It's so easy to think, well, I have to do all of these things. I just absolutely have to do all of these things. There's no way in the world I can simplify my life. But that usually is not true. We're not taking a close look at what we are doing. And we need to, you might say, take a deep look. Why am I doing these things? Do I really need to do all of these things? Are there alternatives? And now, before you can even see alternatives, your mind has to settle down enough so that you see you've got some space and you can see there is room to move around. I was doing a little reading. It wasn't about Buddhism, it was more about psychology. But it was saying that for a lot of people that have had difficulties in their life, a lot of really difficult situations, either growing up or in their adult life, the way they keep all of that stuff from coming to the surface and causing problems for them is to keep busy. And if the busyness isn't enough, then add chaos. Because then, if not only you're busy, but it's chaotic and you never know what's happening next, you're definitely so busy that you don't have time to think about your problems. And so the psychologist was saying, maybe it was a psychiatrist, I'm not sure, was saying that it's a very effective short-term practice, but in the long term, it's doomed to fail. And in fact, in Buddhism, compulsive busyness is considered a form of laziness. But this compulsive busyness, it gets to be that then when you go in and try to practice, your mind is still going, let's say, 120 miles an hour. Chogyam Trungpa, I know he said this one time, that it's like we're afraid that if we left the engine idle, the motor will die. So it is really important, if we are going to practice meditation, if we're going to be mindful, to try to reduce the activities that we have in our daily life, that we quit looking for distraction. And these will help our minds settle down. And if things keep popping up, issues, then it's time to look at those issues, look at them deeply, and maybe try to do a little making friends with them, getting to know them rather than running away and trying to cover them up. Another aspect that Trungpa Rinpoche mentions is that if we indulge in good conduct in our daily lives, that too helps settle our mind down. That non-virtuous activity keeps our minds agitated, disturbed, just churning and churning. So this is very important to look at these prerequisites of mindfulness, whether it be mindfulness on the cushion, and I'm also going to be talking about mindfulness when you're off the cushion. But if you don't have these prerequisites, then it's going to be very, very difficult to really be mindful. And so what mindfulness is paying attention to the details. It is, instead of having this constant subconscious dialogue and other distractions and wanting distractions. It's letting go of that and paying attention to what's happening right now. In a way, it's also about getting to know ourselves, because as our mindfulness develops, we start noticing patterns that certain thoughts, certain emotions keep coming up over and over again, whether we're on the cushion or we're just going through our daily lives. But this is the way we get to know ourselves. And when we're not on the cushion, then we can have some time to, you might say, take a break from the mindfulness and do a little introspection and analysis. So mindfulness is not stress relief. It's not following a bunch of rules. Now, you might have some stress relief, but that isn't the long-term goal of mindfulness. The long-term goal is to progress along the path, whereas stress relief is more of a let's take a vacation attitude. So the benefits are that when we practice mindfulness in shamatha, sitting meditation, that our minds become peaceful little by little and happy. And this leads to the development of our inner wisdom. You might say, we've got the seed there, but through sitting meditation, then this inner wisdom begins to grow and grow and grow and become stronger and more accessible to us. Also, it leads to mental stability and mental clarity. And so these are some of the benefits of the actual practice. So getting into a sitting meditation, I'm going to start here with a quote by Trungpa Rinpoche. One might think that shamatha is a state of no thoughts, perhaps like that of a stone. This is incorrect because in shamatha meditation, the mind is very calm and stable and also very clear, so that it can distinguish and discriminate between all phenomena and everything, and see everything as very distinct. In our book class, they were studying Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism, and Trungpa Rinpoche frequently talks about having an aerial view. And I think it was in our last class, he talked about we start with being mindful of one thing, and then as our practice progresses, then we can be mindful of two things, and then three things, and then four things, and on and on. And eventually we become aware of and mindful of everything without focusing on one thing. So this is where it's going, this seeing everything as very distinct. So there are different stages in meditation. And Khenpo Karta Rinpoche didn't spend too much time with his first stage, but I'm going to go into it. It is meditation on an external object. And this helps us develop concentration. And you could start with a mundane object, something that has nothing to do with Buddhism. Could be a stone, a particular stone that you like, a little pebble, river rock or something. Could be a piece of wood. Something that's easy to concentrate on, to just look at it and then keep your mind focused on it. And of course, you would start with short periods of time. Again, we're working to develop our level of concentration. We are not trying to drive a stake in the ground and tie our mind to it. So a next level would be to have a pure object in front that you are just concentrating on. And that would be a sacred statue. And now the thing about this is that these Tibetan Buddhist statues have more features, and it makes it a little more complicated and difficult to hold your mind on it. But on the other hand, a technique would be to just look at different aspects of the statue. So look at the face, look at the neck, look at the crown, look at perhaps the hands, and so on. And when your concentration, when you lose the concentration and you're off thinking about various things, then just come back to a different part of the statue. And eventually you can hold the whole statue in focus and see all the parts. But this is not about something more lofty than that. It's just taming the mind. It's just getting the mind to settle down. So the next stage here, this first one was having an external object. The next stage is what we do in our deity practices, and that is that visualizing a deity. Or focusing on our breath. So we do both of these types of meditation here. We've started a Thursday evening at 6:15 where we do shamatha meditation. And then on Sundays, we do various pujas, various deity practices. But here, again, we are either looking or visualizing ourselves as an enlightened being, or we are just following the breath in and out, with the emphasis on the breath going out. And this is a more difficult level of concentration, but they help us with this mindfulness of following and holding our mind on what's happening right now. And then coming back when we get distracted. Now, the third level is a Mahamudra level, which is the most advanced level. And we probably do not have the ability to do this, but this is where this ability to concentrate leads. And it is very simply resting in the essence, that the mind is not focused on anything. It's just resting completely stable. It's an unwavering state. And I think even state is not a very good word, because this is beyond description, it's beyond concept and so forth. But it's just completely resting in the essence of mind, which again is beyond description. And it takes a lot of practice, a lot of study, a lot of contemplation, and so forth, and a close relationship with a Vajra master that can teach Mahamudra before you are able to do that. So as we are doing our meditation, whether it be on an object, an external object, or on the breath, thoughts arise. And they're categories of gross thoughts and then subtle thoughts. Now, the gross thoughts are large thoughts, strong thoughts. They cause us to forget we're meditating. We lose the mindfulness completely. There's no real awareness. We just go off when they arise. And then eventually, we remember that we are sitting on the cushion to meditate and we're not meditating. And then we return to the breath or a visualization or whatever else the object of meditation is. Now, it's interesting to point this out, I think, and that is that it wasn't that some external force, something external, anything, caused you to realize that you were not meditating, that it came from within, because this is a natural tendency of mind. And what we are doing when we meditate is encouraging that natural awareness, developing that habit, making it stronger and stronger and stronger. If it didn't come from within, then you would have to have somebody tell you, hey, you're not meditating, get back to the breath. So it's coming from within. And we're just trying to develop that habit, make it stronger, and so forth. And then when you realize that this thought just totally swept you away, it is incorrect to think, I'm doing something wrong, I can't meditate, this shouldn't be happening, or any kind of other thoughts. I'm a bad meditator, I can't do this. That is just more conceptual, gross thoughts. This is a very mundane example, but it's something comparable. You're going about your day and it's in the middle of the afternoon, and all of a sudden you go, oh, I forgot to make that call at 10 o'clock. Well, you didn't forget to make the call at 10 o'clock. You just remembered that you were to make a call at 10 o'clock. And it's good that you remembered. Maybe it would have been better if you remembered at 10 o'clock. But it wasn't that when you remembered, you forgot. You remembered, you forgot. And we can get down on ourselves just for remembering that we forgot. So it's the same here, that it is totally pointless when you remember that you're not meditating and you want to be meditating, to get into all kinds of subconscious gossip about how bad a meditator you are, or whatever. Just come back to the breath. Let go of all of that. So then the subtle thoughts are ones that Trungpa Rinpoche describes as come from below, that they don't distract us at first, and they're difficult to remove. It's kind of like this undercurrent. If we leave them alone, they leave by themselves. But however, if we then start concentrating on them, they quickly become gross thoughts, and that they cause us to lose our meditative concentration. So the point is to not react to these subtle thoughts that are constantly being churned up. This subconscious gossip that may not be really grab us because it's a strong emotion or a strong reaction or whatever, but still it's there. And then we, you might say, get seduced by it. So the solution is to have a stable meditation practice and realize that frequently this is described as the play of the mind. This is just what mind does. And don't expect that the thoughts will stop coming. That the problem isn't the thoughts, it's our attachment to the thoughts. So this is important. Don't get too concerned or frustrated and so forth about the gross thoughts or about the subtle thoughts. Just keep meditating and keep coming back to the breath. That our minds are workable, and these techniques allow us to work with our mind. So, and your mind is not worse than everybody else's. It's easy to think that. I think, from my experience, on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, the best, and 1 being the worst, that we kind of hang out at, my mind is, maybe it's a 1.5. And then sometime later, we start feeling arrogant, and now my mind is about a 9.5. And we kind of flip back and forth between those two extremes, and we never look at our mind as being, it's not too different from everybody else. I'm an average person. But it's really easy to go to those extremes. And it's good to be aware of this. So the technique, the actual technique of mindfulness is to be aware of the present. Concentrate on the present. If you are doing shamatha meditation and following the breath, when you get distracted, just return to following the breath. If you are doing walking meditation, the instructions are to place your awareness on the feet, the motion of the feet, the way the feet touch the floor, and then when they leave the floor, when you're taking a step. And when you get distracted, come back to this, placing your attention on your feet. And then there are other techniques. Some of you have done eating meditation with me, where we eat in silence, and then every few minutes, I'll have a singing bowl by my table and I'll go like this. And you stop eating until you can't hear the bowl ringing anymore, and then you begin eating. And it's interesting. When we're done, I'd like to have people describe what they feel about eating this way. And frequently the responses are things like, I've got to get that recipe, or I ate less food than I normally do, and I'm just as full, or the food tasted wonderful, and so on. And one of my replies to that is that with mindfulness, life tastes better. Even gets to the point where it's wonderful. And nothing has changed in terms of the external circumstances, but the way we're relating to external circumstances has changed dramatically. And what is going on inside our minds has changed dramatically. So we need to be gentle but firm. That Trungpa Rinpoche explains it this way, that we need the mindfulness of the technique. We need awareness, and awareness will let us know when we go off and are not following a technique anymore. And then the third is vigilance. And that is when we become aware that we are not following the technique, we're not being mindful, then we bring ourselves back rather than, well, I need to finish this train of thought. It's going in a good direction. And then I'll come back. So that's a lack of vigilance. The vigilance is as soon as you realize that you are, you become aware that you're not being mindful and doing the technique, you gently bring yourself back without recrimination, without judgment, and so forth, and return to doing the technique. Problems are anger and frustration. That is a big problem when you get frustrated with the practice, when you get angry at yourself or angry at something else because maybe your practice isn't going the way you would like it to. So it's important to realize we call this a practice because it is a practice. It's not a performance. You're not getting graded on it. This is not like a non-competitive sport where you're competing with yourself and what you have done in the past. The example that I like to use in terms of practice is a musician. They don't just go out on stage, maybe sometimes once a day. They've got a regular gig, sometimes once a week, maybe even less than that in many cases. But in between these performances, they practice. They practice, practice, practice. And not only that, I suspect, I've never talked to a musician about this, but I suspect a musician, a good musician, is going to say that they learn things from their performances, and in a way, because of that, their performances are actually practice. So keep that in mind, that this is a practice. We're not judging it. If you do want to look how your practice is going, look how it is now versus maybe a year ago, 2 years ago. But what happens is that even during a practice, we can have a period of, being able to follow the breath quite well. And then we get distracted, then we quickly come back. Then some distraction, and we quickly come back. But then after a half hour, we get distracted and we kind of remain distracted. Then we come back. And then we get distracted and then we come back and so forth. And then towards the end, maybe we put a little more effort in it and we're able to have less distraction and come back more quickly. It can go any way. And to realize that's just the way this is and not get too concerned about it, but just keep going. So just keep doing it and have confidence that what you are doing is beneficial in the long run. As long as you're doing it properly and doing it regularly, you want to develop good habitual patterns. I kind of like to use the example of you want to make a cup of tea. If you take your tea kettle, your hot water kettle, and put it on the stove, turn on the heat, and then after about 30 seconds, turn off the heat. Come back 3 days later, you've got the same kettle, same water, turn on the heat for about 30 seconds and then turn off the heat. Come back a month later, turn on the heat for 30 seconds. Well, you're never going to get a cup of tea. And so it's important to have the regular practice. I can't stress this enough. And going back to the proper environment, I hear this a lot, that people have animals, pets, in the shrine room with them. And this can be a huge distraction. It also can be a huge distraction if the animal is on the outside of the door and you've closed it and they're scratching or whining because they want to get in. But these are things that need to be dealt with in one way or another. That if your animals are interfering with your practice, what's more important? That life is short. We have all come in contact with excellent teachers, Gyalwang Karmapa, Khenpo Karta Rinpoche, and on and on. There are many good Khenpos right now at KTD. KTD is the western seat of Karmapa. I heard the other day that Rinpoche once described KTD as being the Bodh Gaya of America, because it's the seat in the West of Gyalwang Karmapa. So we have these great connections with these great teachers. Next lifetime, who knows? Even if you're born a human, you're probably not going to have this close connection, and you might not even have an interest in the Dharma. You could be born in a country where there is really no Dharma available. You could be born to parents that are very poor or that mistreat you. And you're just dealing with all kinds of issues that give you no chance to come in contact with the Dharma or to have the leisure necessary to practice the Dharma. That now is the time to practice the Dharma. And if you haven't retired yet, it's incorrect thinking to say, well, then when I retire, I'll have time to practice the Dharma. If you can't find time now, you're not going to find it after you retire. I promise you. So let's see here, moving right along. Important examples. These are experiences that you can have when you are practicing shamatha meditation. And they are the waterfall, the rapids, the wide river, and then the ocean. And so the waterfall is the stage that we experience when we first start. And that is that our mind is like this river falling over a cliff and totally uncontrolled. And as it's going down, it's creating foam and water vapor clouds. Hits the rocks on the bottom and just total chaos and little or no control. And so that's where we start, realizing this is our mind. This is what it does. This is what it's doing now. And it does this when we're not meditating, but we're not aware of it. So this is our starting point. With practice, we get a glimpse of the rapids where it's not quite so fast moving, not quite so wild, but the water again is just bouncing off and moving over, creating a lot of foam, these rocks in the river. So there's still plenty of speed. There's still plenty that really is uncontrolled. But this is an improvement from a waterfall. And again, you might begin with a waterfall experience and then later on have an experience of the rapids. You might have meditated for years and you sit down and all of a sudden you're back to the waterfall. Just being aware of this is fine, but don't go beyond that. Just let any judgments be. What meditation really is letting ourselves be. Just let it be as simple as possible. But then the rapids experience can then change to what's described as a wide river. And that is there aren't rocks in it. It's a wide river. It appears to be moving slowly. There's no waves on it if there's no wind. And so that is when our mind settles down and we have a certain degree of concentration. And every once in a while we get distracted. When I say every once in a while, it might be seconds, might be a few minutes, but we get distracted, but we come back to it. And then the last is when the river flows into the ocean. And it's described as a huge ocean without waves. And that's when the mind really settles down and there is this experience of vastness. When we're not on the cushion, we can be mindful of different things. We can be mindful of outer objects. We can be mindful of our body. And we can be mindful of, you might say, the inner landscape of our mind. And I'm just going to introduce this and save this for a talk later, probably in April, because our March calendar is full already. But if we, when we're not on the cushion, if we occasionally stop and look at where our mind is, we start seeing again patterns to what we are thinking about, what emotions we are having as we go through the day. And a trick that I learned, which I think is really, I found it very beneficial, and that is that it's kind of like the light on your dashboard that says check engine or maintenance needed. I think it depends on the model and the year. There might be another term light that comes up that has another thing but means the same thing. I like the idea of maintenance required. And that is if you find that you are in a bad mood, you're unhappy, you're kind of maybe just not very happy, not pleased with what's going on, and you find yourself really judgmental, that's the time that maintenance is required. And the maintenance is to look at what you are thinking and to let go of it. So that's one of the things I'm going to talk about with inner mindfulness. Now, mindfulness of the body can come when we're doing walking meditation, as I said, paying our attention to the motion of our feet. You can be mindful when you're drinking a cup of tea, taking your hand, mindful of the motions that it takes to grab the tea cup in your hands and then raise it up and bring it to your mouth, and then it touches your lips, and you then suck in a little bit of tea and the feeling of the tea in your mouth, and on and on and on. This, again, can help focus our mind on what we're doing. If you are doing something, let's say with a keyboard, you might spend a little bit of time just the feelings of the fingers. You've got to be thinking about what you're putting into the computer, but occasionally just focus on a little bit more mindfulness of what you're doing. And then the outer mindfulness is mindful of what others are doing, how they're reacting to you. The question was about Tonglen. Is it a Vipassana practice? And the answer is that it is a Mahayana practice that incorporates mindfulness and awareness of shamatha. But we're having a visualized object rather than just an actual physical object. So we're visualizing ourselves, we're visualizing this being in front of us, and we're visualizing this exchange that takes the form of white light that we're giving and black smoke that we are breathing in. And the white light carries with it things that we consider are valuable. And the black smoke carries in the suffering of the being in front. And so it is this mindfulness awareness practice that's on the Mahayana level. And the Vipassana would include, a Vipassana meditation would include this awareness of space, lots of space. And Vipassana can also include some contemplation, trying to, you might say, investigate the experiences and investigate different things that you have, techniques that you have heard about how to do this Vipassana. And then a suggestion was made that many teachers teach to meditate for a 10-minute period, doing shamatha, following the breath, and then do the Tonglen for 10 minutes, and then do another 10 minutes of shamatha, following the breath. And this is a good technique because the first session of following a breath calms our mind down a little bit. And then the Tonglen agitates it because we're doing what our ego does not want. Our ego wants to get away from all the suffering and the negative things. And here we are taking them on and giving away what ego wants to hold on to. So ego doesn't like that. It makes ego feel very uncomfortable. So after we get it all agitated, then we do another 10 minutes of shamatha, and hopefully our mind calms down. So the one person made this observation that I'm planning on retiring in the not too distant future, and I hope you're wrong about not finding time to practice when you retire if you can't find it now. But she also said that she does take 1 week a month off, and she is able to practice and find it very beneficial. Well, I'm going to make this observation, and that is about how our expectations have gone up and up and up and up and up over the years. And I'm going back to my childhood. When I was 13, we moved down to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and my folks bought what was built as a show home by a contractor. You know, it had all the bells and whistles in it, had 2 natural stone fireplaces, not these fake stones that you just kind of paste on the surface. It had 2 full bathrooms and a half bath. I don't know how many square feet. And Dad had an executive job. His boss, now this was 1958. One time Dad and Mom and us kids went over to visit his boss socially. His boss lived in a house that nowadays you would go, I can't believe anyone would live in that house. On one side was a stadium that they had football games in for high school. And some of the neighbors would stand outside during football games and charge people to park in their yards. And on the other, it was on a corner, and the other street was a main street. And in fact, when I was in high school, I had, we were playing a rival high school team. And I was just walking by, and this guy pulled me into this group of his friends and had a knife at my throat. I mean, this was not a good neighborhood to live in, but that's where my dad's boss lived in. Now, to move up to the present, I happened to be good friends with a guy that he and his wife worked for General Motors, and they were union workers. You know, they were union workers. Well, he bought a house. It was a house that was built in the 90s. He bought it recently, and I visited him. And by golly, that house was close to the level of my folks' house in 1958. And now, again, my dad worked for J. Paul Getty. And in 1968, he was 67, I think it was. I did a little research on the internet here, and my dad worked for him in the 60s and the 70s. And in the mid-60s, J. Paul Getty was the richest man in the world. And in today's dollars, it was a little over $7 billion. Elon Musk is worth just under $300 billion. And that isn't enough, I guess. Doesn't seem like he wants to retire. But, you know, it's just gone this way for everybody, except the people in the bottom that are homeless and so on and so forth. But even, you know, we seem to not be satisfied with what we have and think we need more. Dad, again, had a very high level job. We never had a second home. In the late 50s and early 60s, we piled in the car. and would stop at grocery stores and buy food and then go to a park and make lunch and stay in cheap, not cheap motels, but stay in motels. I never went on a trip with them where we flew, never went on a cruise, never went. We did go to Canada one time, but we drove. You know, it was like that. And of course, the cars then were closer to the Model T than a car that age with the present car that I have. But, well, it's, you know, there's just no end to desire. And it's like, no, we've got to have better, better, better. My grandmother grew up in a house that was older than the one that I have, which is built in the mid 1890s. And she talked lovingly about her childhood. And they probably had a wood stove in every room of the house that they wanted to heat because there was no insulation. The windows didn't block out the wind, and on and on and on. So I'm kind of rambling on about this, but maybe we don't need as much as what we think we need. The question is that you talked about mindfulness, awareness, and vigilance. And so mindfulness is, of course, of the technique. And if you're following the breath, it's mindfulness of the breath, which the questioner already knew that, and he understood vigilance. So he was wondering about awareness. Awareness of what? And it is actually kind of a two-part. It's awareness of whether you are doing the technique, and also kind of awareness of the general environment that you are in. I can give you a personal example of the difference between mindfulness and awareness. Many years ago, I did a shamatha retreat here in my place, and I had a good friend of mine over, and he was doing a retreat here too. Can't remember what he was doing. But anyway, during one of the breaks, I wanted to go to town and get something, probably something for lunch. So he had parked in the drive. I had parked in the drive. So I'm doing a mindfulness retreat. So I very mindfully got the keys, walked over to the car, opened the door, put the keys in the ignition, started it up, paying attention to the feel of the wheels, the sound, put it in reverse, and promptly backed into his car. So that's mindfulness without the awareness. Does that answer your question?